Omaha, Nebraska, America's gateway to the West. Once home to the Omaha Indian tribe, the name itself means dwellers on the bluff. Lewis and Clark passed this way during their famous expedition. The land later became a center point for fur traders and outposts. In more modern times, the city became known for its various inventions, including Raisin Bran and the Reuben sandwich. It's home to one of the world's largest conglomerates, Berkshire Hathaway, controlled by one of the world's richest men, Warren Buffett. But between the years of 1988 to 1991, Omaha, Nebraska came to be known for something much more insidious. Growing inside the heartland of America was an evil so dark that it's hard for the mind to comprehend. A 2-year investigation by the Nebraska State Foster Care Review Board, alleging bizarre reports of child abuse, was submitted to the state legislature for further investigation. The information that this investigation produced stunned the public to its core. Inside Omaha, a cult of devil worshippers, including high-level U.S. politicians and prominent citizens of Nebraska, was engaged in the systematic rape, mutilation, ritual sacrifice, and cannibalism of numerous children. It was discovered that children in Nebraska's foster care system were being flown to Washington, D.C. to be exploited at sex parties for the powerful elites. Linked to the pedophile ring was a network of criminal enterprises, many being operated by the Central Intelligence Agency, including drug trafficking and illegal arms dealing. In the center of the child prostitution ring was the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union, which was operated by this man, Lawrence E. King, Jr., a rising star in the Republican Party. King was a wealthy and well-connected citizen in Omaha, the manager of a federal credit union, owner of several homes and luxury cars. Lawrence King was living the high life, and the future seemed bright. But in 1985, the first omen of future disaster came to pass. On June 10th, the Sheriff's Department in Washington County, Nebraska, contacted the Department of Social Services to report that they had picked up 3 foster children and 1 adopted child who had been living in the home of Jarrett and Barbara Webb following a complaint of abuse. Barbara Webb was the cousin of Lawrence King, and her husband, Jarrett, served on King's board of directors at the credit union. The Sheriff's Department discovered that the Webbs had been beating the 4 children for quite some time. The children's backs were covered in welts and scratches from being hit with a railroad iron. Further investigation revealed that several previous foster care and adopted children had run away from the Webbs' home. One such child was Nellie Patterson Webb, who, at age 16, fled the home and found refuge with her grandmother. Investigators learned that Jarrett Webb had been sexually molesting her since she was 9 years old. Nellie described him French kissing her so forcefully that she couldn't breathe. As time progressed, the molestation grew progressively worse, and Nellie ran away from home. Several more interviews revealed that at least 6 of the children had in fact been tortured by the Webbs, who would force the children to strip naked, beat them with rubber hoses, and withhold food from the children for days at a time. To validate her claims, young Nellie submitted to 4 polygraph tests, which all revealed that she was speaking truthfully. In a confusing twist, after the state suspended the foster care license of Jarrett and Barbara Webb, the county prosecutor whose job it was to prosecute the Webbs for their crimes, a man named Patrick Tripp, came to the defense of the Webbs. He refused to file any charges against the Webbs and went so far as to publicly state that regardless of the corroborating testimonies and the polygraph examinations of Nellie, all of the children were in fact liars. Surprisingly, the person who had demanded the polygraphs in the first place had been Tripp himself. Among the claims that the Webb children had made was that they knew that other children, specifically young boys, were also being abused at a large orphanage in Omaha called Boys Town. One youth care worker at Boys Town named Julie Walters told authorities that she had spoken with County Prosecutor Patrick Tripp and that Tripp was complaining to everyone that all the abuse claims were untrue and that there was no reason at all to even conduct any further investigation. This same attitude by Tripp was later reported by several law enforcement agencies involved in the case. What law enforcement didn't know at that time was that Tripp had good reason to want the investigation closed. Two of his close friends had been named as pedophile abusers by Nellie Webb and her sister Kimberly. One was the superintendent of schools, DeWard Finch, and the other was high school principal Kent Miller. Thanks to Tripp's efforts, no criminal charges were filed against the Webbs, and no social services investigation into the alleged abuse was ever conducted. Why did Nellie and her sister believe that these men were child molesters? According to interview transcripts, not only did the Webbs molest the children in their own homes, but they took the children around to parties hosted by Lawrence King. The parties typically took place on Friday nights and usually consisted of about 10 to 15 older men and about 25 young teenage girls. Other parties were hosted in King's home every other week, in which children from the Boys Town orphanage were brought in to attend. The Webb children, including young Joey Webb, reported that at the parties the men would select one of the young teenagers in attendance, hold out a $50 or $100 bill, and after the money was exchanged, the men would take their chosen child prostitutes upstairs or to some other part of the house to have sex. Nellie and Kimberly noted that at some of the parties, however, the sex took place as a group, with people swapping children around, and even with couples, including their own parents, joining in the sexual activity with other couples. In the report written up by the Boys Town worker Julie Walters, the children had said that they were constantly threatened with injury or worse, and that the threats came not only from their parents, but from Lawrence King himself. King had told some of the children that if they talked about anything they had seen, that he would break their legs. In that same report, Walters describes how Lawrence King and his wife would actually take a few of the children at a time, including Nellie and Kimberly, on trips to places like Chicago, New York City, and Washington, D.C., when Nellie was just 15 years old. Nellie was taken along under the pretense that she was acting as the babysitter for the King's young son. But just like back home in Nebraska, the parties that Nellie was taken to by King involved high-profile guests. She personally met then Vice President George Bush at one of the parties, a party in which she witnessed some older men sodomizing younger men in their 20s. As outrageous as this story may sound, the fact is that Nellie told these stories on record nearly 3 years before the Washington Post rocked the political world with a damning front-page expose detailing a network of homosexual callboys conducting services in the Reagan-Bush White House. And this would not be the last time that the name of George Bush would surface during this sordid series of events. From my analysis of the various interview transcripts, it appears clear that not only were these sex parties being used to make money, but their primary purpose appears to be an effort to entrap wealthy officials, politicians, or other prominent citizens and blackmail them for money or for political favors. In the transcript of Walter's interview with Kimberly Webb, who was 16 years old at the time of the interview, the teenager reported overhearing her mother, Barbara, talking to another party on the phone about Superintendent of Schools, DeWard Finch. Barbara was overheard saying, quote, "I got Finch all the way. I caught him several times down there with black girls." According to Kimberly, Finch had visited the Webb home during school hours. Also, Kimberly said that her mother would regularly come to the school to meet with both Finch and the school principal. Because Kimberly had study hall in a room across from the school's main office, she could see her mother go into the office sometimes carrying a large bag, and would often stay in the office for hours with the men. Kimberly said that from snooping around her parents' bedroom, she learned that the bag itself contained pornographic photos and videos. But due to the interference of prosecutor Patrick Tripp, neither the Webbs, the school officials, or Lawrence King were investigated at that time. And the story seemed to end for a time, as Lawrence King was invited by the Republican Party to sing the national anthem at their presidential nominating convention for George Bush in 1988, just as he had done previously in 1984 when Bush was Reagan's vice president. However, if King thought he was in the clear, he was dead wrong, because in 1988, a new investigation began. an investigation that exploded into global headlines involving the very same cabal associated with Lawrence King. But this time, the accusations were made by a party who had no knowledge of the webs or the prior investigation. Accusations that included alarming tales of satanic ritual abuse and the eating of child victims. Join me next time as we discuss that horrifying story to try to bring the deeds of these evil child molesters out of the darkness and into the light. For the End Times News Report, I'm Jake Morphonios.